Hey, this is Tim DeForest, producer and co-host along with Jess Terrell and Scott Stewart of the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast. Now, because some stuff that's going on in our lives, I'm afraid there might be a hiatus in the podcast for a little while. So, to satisfy my delusion that there are hundreds of thousands of people out there just desperate for more content, I'm going to be doing these What I Read Each Month videos in order to put something in place on YouTube until the podcast is ready to pick up again. So this video is going to be about the books that I read in May or listened to in May. I will include audiobooks in this. Ironically, I did not happen to read an Edgar Rice Burroughs book this month. I am currently reading through his stuff in publication order, and I'm up to The Chessmen of Mars. And that's in addition to whichever one I will jump ahead to or jump back to read if we're discussing it in a podcast episode. But I just didn't happen to get one read this month. I did, though, manage to get a few things read. And let's begin. Now, the book Malibu Burning by Lee Goldberg is the first in a series about two arson investigators who work for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. The third one was about to come out. In fact, it has since come out. It's the book I'm currently reading. And so when I saw that was about to come out, I realized that I needed to get caught up with this series. It's set in the same universe as another series that Goldberg writes about a Sheriff's Department detective named Eve Ronin. A series I've been enjoying enormously, and I understand there's another Eve Ronin book coming out later this year. So I wanted to read this series as well. In fact, Eve turns out to be a guest in one of these books, at least one of these books, a guest star. And so there are these crossovers, so I wanted to get caught up. When I'm reading a series, I normally like to break it up, to read one and then read some other stuff before returning to the next one. In this case, because I wanted to get caught up before the third one came out, I read the first two books, Malibu Burning and Ashes Never Lie, one after another. And by the way, if somebody checks a copy of Ashes Never Lie out of the Sarasota Public Library system and notices a very small chocolate cake stain on one page while you're reading it, that was not my fault. I was reading the book and actually burglars broke into the house and left a chocolate cake stain on the page, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And that is a true story. So anyway, Malibu Burning, starting with that one, it's really a superbly written novel with a number of great plot twists at the end. And I have noticed in just about every Goldberg book I've read, and he is just wonderful at plot twists, stuff that you just do not see coming. Now, the two protagonists, as I said, are arson investigators with the Los Angeles Fire Department. The book spends at least as much time with the bad guys in this case, the leader of whom is a con man and a thief who plans on setting wildfires to cover the robbing of wealthy homeowners who would be forced to evacuate. But the bad guys in this case are not all bad. Their leader, Danny Cole, has moral standards. He plans the heist not just for the money, but also to stick it to some rich guys who have made their living ripping off average people. He also plans to help out the widows of two men who had died fighting fires in the past and are now deluged with bills they have no hope of paying. Danny's a bit of a Robin Hood. He's definitely a crook, and he does want to enrich himself, but he's also a man who once ended up doing a prison term because he stopped to save someone's life. So, the great characterizations of both the cops and the crooks give additional background to an already strong plot. The climax, as I said, has several twists that I did not see coming, but make perfect sense in context to the story being told. Now, the second in this series, and the arson investigators, by the way, are named Sharp and Walker, continues with the same high quality. This one is really as good as the first. The two protagonists investigate a possible arson when a home burns down. This initial investigation branches out along several lines, tracking down several different arsonists, at least one of whom is also a murderer. Along the way, they do team up with Eve Ronin, the lead character from Goldberg's other excellent series. So, Ashes Never Lie is a solid police procedural and a thriller. But if it were a superhero comic, it'd be compared to a really good issue of Marvel Team Up or Brave and the Bold, because E. Ronan and Walker in particularly really work well together. The strong plot generates a lot of tension, and it leads once again to the sort of magnificent plot twist that Goldberg is so good at. All this is enhanced by the equally strong characterizations. Sharp and Walker play well off each other, and Walker's relationship with his wife gives him added dimension. And so those were the first two books I read this month. Malibu Burning and Ashes Never Lie, the first two books in the Sharp and Walker series by Lee Goldberg. Next, I have been reading through the novelizations of the original Planet of the Apes movies, and I finished up this month reading Battle for the Planet of the Apes by David Gerrold. Now, this is a fairly faithful and well-written novelization of the last of the original Planet of the Apes films. And many consider it to be the weakest of the Ape films, but I have a nostalgic fondness for it because it's the only one I got to see in a theater when it was originally released. Now, there's some spoilers ahead in this. The major differences between the film and the novelization come during and immediately after the final battle between the apes and the mutants. I'm guessing that the movie had to cut back on the scale of the battle from what might have been in the script, because the novel is a much more epic fight, with General Aldo, the ape bad guy, actually playing a key role in helping the apes win in the end. Also, Aldo's one-on-one fight with Caesar is longer and more complex than in the movie. My guess is that the movie simplified things for budget reasons, but that's just a guess. David Gerrold's an excellent writer, and he might have added to the story on his own. There's also some scenes set in the irradiated city that clearly establishes the mutants have the Alpha Omega bomb. That's the bomb that destroys the Earth at the end of the second movie, and are on a path to end up worshipping it. Now, this is a scene that was originally in the movie and was cut from the theatrical release, and I've not seen the Blu-ray edition of this movie, but I'm told it's reinserted into that edition. And this scene puts the relatively upbeat ending up for interpretation. I've always felt, and I should say that not all ape fans agree with me, that the movie leaned towards a more optimistic ending, and the future had been changed for the better. The movie leaves the more pessimistic ending, in which the apes do as rotten a job running civilization as humans do, and the Earth ends up being destroyed, as a stronger possibility. Next, I read the two novels by Gordon D. Sheriffs, originally published in the early 60s, Roanoke Raiders and Powder Boy of the Monitor. Sheriffs was a superb writer of westerns, and he also wrote a number of young adult novels, what are now called young adult novels. I don't think the term existed when he wrote this. I think they might have been called juveniles. But these are two of his young adult novels. Both are naval adventures set during the Civil War. Both are excellent. The young adult status means that no one swears, smokes, or chews tobacco, or, when all of that would have been quite common. But the characters, the story, and the action are all strong. Roanoke Raiders is told from the point of view of a young sailor named David Scott, who eventually goes along on a mission to destroy a powerful Confederate ironclad. Now, though Scott is fictional, the mission really happened. Union sailors sneaked close enough to the ironclad in a small boat to use a quote-unquote mine, in this case an explosive at the end of a long pole, to blow a hole in the ironclad's bottom. The extended action scene in which the mission is carried out and then the few survivors try to escape back to Union lines is really quite excellent. Now, Powder Boy of the Monitor puts the main character, Dick Morgan, aboard the Union's first ironclad as it battles the Confederate Merrimack. This scene is exciting, but the best action scenes come later. The Monitor crew desperately trying to escape the vessel when it later sinks in a storm off Cape Hatteras is a fantastic sequence. And so is the scene later on when Morgan finds himself lost along the shore of a Confederate-controlled river with the need to get vital information back to his new ship. So that is Roanoke Raiders and Powder Boy of the Monitor by Gordon D. Sheriffs. A Sound of Thunder and Other Stories by Ray Bradbury. Now, I like to read a few short stories between each novel I read to sort of cleanse the literary palate, if I may sound obnoxiously pretentious for a moment. And so I gradually finish up various anthologies. One anthology I had going that I did finish this month was A Sound of Thunder. And this has got some of Bradbury's best stuff in it. A time-traveling safari to hunt dinosaurs, rockets to other planets, a man with wings, a small-town life, a dollop of horror, science fiction that runs on imagination and doesn't worry that much about the science, Mars as it should be, Venus as it should be, the joy of being a child during a summer vacation, an old man whose stories of the past make him feel like a time machine to the kids who listen to him, a monster from the past in love with a lighthouse. This anthology really does feature several of Bradbury's best stories, and it literally drips with imagination. Next, I read a graphic novel, and I just don't care what my wife says. Angela is the wisest, best wife in the world, but she is wrong when she says graphic novels shouldn't count as one of the books you've read. In this volume, this is Crisis on Multiple Earths, Volume 2. This contains the last two Justice League Justice Society team-ups written by Gardner Fox, and the first two written by Denny O'Neil. What happened was that the Justice League of America exists on Earth 1. The Justice Society of America, which consists of the superheroes that were featured in DC Comics originally in the 1940s, exist on Earth 2. Once a year, they would cross over, visit each other's respective universes, and fight some threat together. Now, both Gardner Fox and Denny O'Neil pretty much throw logic to the winds and introduce wild threats to both Earth 1 and Earth 2 that barely make sense even when comic book logic is applied. But that's not a criticism. This is how it should be. If the most powerful superheroes in the DC multiverse are going to team up, then the stakes really need to be high. Within these stories, we're introduced to the Earth 2 and grown-up Robin in a new costume, and the new Red Tornado. We also witness the death of Larry Lance, followed by the newly widowed Black Canary, Diana Lance, her decision to move to Earth 1. Also, at one point, we get to see two Supermans beat each other unconscious. These are nice bonuses within stories with over-the-top threats to all reality and a cast of a dozen or so superheroes per story. It's really wonderful stuff. Next, I read the first in a series of fictional Davy Crockett adventures. The first one's called Homecoming. This was written by David Robbins. They were originally published with him writing under the name of David Thomas. And this one features Davy Crockett and his sidekick Flavius Harris on their way home to Tennessee when they end up rescuing two Indian women, one elderly and one young and pretty, from the braves of another tribe. This leads to several more narrow escapes, some captures, and then more escapes. Davy, who is married, fending off the advances of the younger Indian lass, and eventually Davy taking part in a battle to defend the lady's village against the opposing tribe. The climax involves a sort of a dogfight involving canoes. It's a good, solid adventure story, set in a time between when the real-life Davy fought in the Creek War and his eventual entry into politics. The author makes Davy a strong hero. The inclusion of a comedic sidekick who also can still be depended on reminds me of Buddy Ebsen's character from the Disney version of Crockett's life. Flavius may echo that archetype, but the author uses him effectively, and he's a fun inclusion to the story. Crockett is a natural choice for a paperback adventures series, and this first volume gives the series a strong start. I will be continuing to read this. I think there were 9 in the series altogether, so I'll be gradually getting through them over the next few months. Next, I revisited a old Star Trek novel, Planet of Judgment. This was one of several novels printed in the late 70s and early 80s when Bantam Books had the license. These are books that have long since gone out of print because the current publisher, Simon & Schuster, I think, but don't quote me on that, does not have the rights to these early novels. These early publications included the short story adaptations of the original episodes by James Blish and a number of original novels. And this one, Planet of Judgment, is the first of 2 Trek novels written by the noted science fiction author Joe Haldeman. Back when, this was at a time when Bantam Books had this. Their occasional novels were really the only new stories we poor Trekkies could get, so we just ate them up. At this point, it was not a flood of new Star Trek media all the time. It was rare stuff featuring, at that time, the only crew of the only Enterprise that we knew. Now, I read this when it was first published in 1977, so I do have a nostalgic fondness for it. But even taking that into consideration, I think it's excellent. It's a strong story that also captures the personalities of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. What's interesting is that in the foreword to his second Trek novel, which was titled World Without End, Haldeman writes that he was overseas in Vietnam when the series aired, and his background information comes largely from James Blish's short story adaptations of the episodes. A few elements from this novel also indicate that he was using the Starfleet technical manual that was in print at the time. There's a favorite part in this, a character moment separate from the main plot, and this comes when Spock is discussing Nurse Chapel's crush on him with McCoy. Why, Spock asks, would Chapel pursue a relationship that would, because of Vulcan biology, be one of almost complete abstinence? Ponfar only comes once every 7 years. McCoy points out that Spock's own mother was human. Mother and I have never discussed this frankly, says Spock. That's the most human thing I've ever heard you say, replies McCoy. It's just a great moment. I believe it was later established in Star Trek that Vulcans can have relations outside of Ponfar, but I never cared for that. The way Haldeman portrays Vulcans here, is an effective reminder that they are not human beings with funny ears, but aliens who are fundamentally different from humans. Anyway, the main plot, which is wonderful, involves a planet that seems to defy physics and a powerful alien race with enormous mental powers. Kirk and a number of his crew end up trapped on the planet and only gradually find out what the aliens have in mind. The intense climax has Kirk and Spock in mental duels with members of yet another powerful alien race. The duels involve illusions, such as Spock commanding a sailing ship fighting pirates, or Spock swimming inside a sun with the purpose of causing it to go nova. It's all an illusion, but losing still means real-life death. McCoy, who fights a preliminary duel with an alien, finds himself on a 19th century riverboat in a poker game that spirals into bizarre and lethal chaos. So the world building here is excellent, and we gradually learn the purposes of the various aliens involved, and that's done in a really effective manner. And this relatively short novel moves the story along at a brisk pace. It really does feel like Star Trek. It captures the camaraderie of the crew and the desire to explore strange new worlds. It's a novel I revisit from time to time, along with its sequel, World Without End, which I'll probably be reading next month. It's just a way of spending time in one of my favorite fictional universes. So that's Planet of Judgment by Joe Haldeman. Next, Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. Angela and I have found a podcast with 2 people who are doing a really good job of analyzing all of Agatha Christie's novels and short stories. So we have been reading whatever novel is up in the next episode we haven't listened to yet, or short story. We read it together and then talk about it and listen to the podcast. And in this one, this is a Poirot novel, and Hercule Poirot isn't at first trying to solve a murder. He's trying to prevent one. Nick, that's a nickname for a young lady, Nick Buckler. Buckler is a young lady who lives at End House. When the novel opens, there's been at least 4 attempts on her life. There's a small number of people with the means and the opportunity for murder attempts, but there's no apparent motive. Poirot has to figure out not just the who, but also the why. Now, not surprisingly, there is eventually a murder, though it's not the victim we expect. Typical of Dame Agatha's work, Peril at End House is a strong mystery that unfolds in an unexpected way. So, Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. Next, we have Lady Penelope, Cool for Danger. And this is a book set in the Thunderbirds universe, but without an appearance by the Thunderbirds. This was the stop motion show from the 60s, one of just my favorite shows of all time, because the vehicles were so cool, about international rescue, performing these rescues of people with their cool vehicles. Lady Penelope was their London kind of secret agent. And she is the main character here. And it's actually okay that the Thunderbirds don't pop up, because the unflappable Lady Penelope is a great character in herself. Along with her former her butler chauffeur, former burglar named Parker, Penelope sets out to rescue a fellow agent who's been imprisoned in a small European country. Along the way, the two run afoul of an old enemy, Mr. Steelman, who has a small army of robot henchmen, a weather control machine, and a desire to rob the treasury of that small European country. Parker and Penelope travel mostly via Fab 1, a pink Rolls-Royce tricked out with more gadgets than Bond's Aston Martin. In fact, although Penelope does have her own distinct personality, the plot, the bad guy, and the overall ambience of the book is very much influenced by the Bond films. There's captures and escapes galore as the action moves from Europe to the Sahara. The ending is a bit anticlimactic, with Mr. Steelman escaping, I'm guessing to reappear in later Lady Penelope novels. There will be two of them. And with the weather control device introduced early on as if it were the MacGuffin of the story, playing no major role in the climax. But there's still some good action stuff throughout the novel, with Lady P and Parker making a fun team. Now, the last book I've read this month was The Romanoff Jewels by Maxwell Grant, a shadow novel. Now, there is currently an excellent fanzine being published called The Shadowed Circle, and they have started a shadow book club. And this is the one that this was the next one they were going to have a virtual book club meeting on. So I reread it. It's one I've read several times before. It is a great shadow novel. The Shadow was a pulp character from the 1930s and 40s. He appeared in, was it 325 issues of the Shadow magazine? I think I'm getting the number right. It was in the 300s. Most of which were written by Walter Gibson under the house name of Maxwell Grant. And he's a great character. He just battles crimes by lurking in the shadows, using brilliant detective skills, using escape artist techniques when he needs them, and confronting the bad guys with his blazing 45s. In this one, the action takes him out of New York City, where he's normally based. There's a violent faction of czarists who are planning to steal the Romanov crown jewels from the communists. And the Shadow ends up battling against both these factions, because there's no good guys here, except for the Shadow. Both the czarists and the Bolsheviks are rotten and murderous. The action moves from New York to Moscow, then back to New York via Paris, then back to then continuing on to New York aboard a ocean liner. There's multiple gunpowder battles. There's captures and escapes. There's a great plot twist at the end involving the final fate of the jewels. This is a top quality shadow novel. And so that is it. That is what I read and so that's it. That is what I read in May of 2025. Once again, the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast is on a little bit of a hiatus. I know it's sometimes a few months between episodes anyway, but it might be a while now. We'll get back to producing that podcast when we can. I hope this sampling of what I read this month, considering that my taste in literature is superb, provides some entertaining content for you. And I will be back next month with another episode, and just thank you for listening.